Thank you for watching us today. We're continuing our series of conversations with luminaries, influencers, and people who are not only unleashing their greatness, but also helping others do the same. My friend today and my guest is a very close friend, Charlie Engle, and he's an extraordinary human being. First of all, welcome, Charlie, to this conversation.
Thank you, my friend. It's great to be here. I feel like it's been too long since I've seen you, so it's nice to be connected.
Correct. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in North Carolina, so I'm at Durham at home for the time being. So like you, I travel a lot, so I count my blessings when I get to sit in my own house and do this.
Wonderful. So let's share with our audience a little bit about your extraordinary career, starting with how you moved from, what should I say, spirits to spirit.
I love how you say that. You were the first person I ever heard say that, and now I use it all the time. So it's beautiful. Yeah, as you know, my journey has been one of, as I like to say, I've spent a lot of time down here and a lot of time up here, and not really a lot of time in that middle zone. But early on in my life, I found my way into drugs and alcohol, and like many people, some of it's genetic, some of it is environmental, some of it literally just happens, and some part of me wanted to hide. And I found out that alcohol and drugs would do that for me. And even while I continued to be fairly successful in business and in other ways, I was continuing a very long slide down into the abyss of addiction. And after about 10 years of that, my first son was born, and I think he gave me the kickstart that I needed to finally admit that this was a big problem for me and that I needed to make a change. And as I like to say, I had a choice between living and dying, and I chose running, which for some people might be similar to dying, but we're gonna change their minds about that today. But then I started running all over the world, and I found out that running kind of did this thing for me. It gave me a place to go, very much like meditation for you. It gave me a place to go in my mind. It helped my spirit and my body. And I ended up running in over 40 countries. And some of those were races, some were just adventures. And that culminated in my run across the Sahara Desert, which was nearly 5,000 miles. And I ran close to 2 marathons every day for over 100 days in a row. And, that event sort of was I would call it the linchpin. There was before the Sahara and after. And after, even though it was a seminal event, after also brought me more than my share of struggles. So I think it's one of those lessons in life that you think when you're going to reach some certain point and some accomplishment, that suddenly everything is going to be wonderful forever. And, that's not always how it happens. But one final thing I'll say, and now I'm coming up on late in July, I'll have 30 years of continuous sobriety and abstinence from drugs and alcohol. And I can certainly say that my life has been significantly better because of it.
Now, before you started running for this cause, you were running away from the police. You got into a lot of trouble. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, and thanks for asking, because it really was as I mentioned, my first son was born, and I had tried rehab, I'd gone to meetings, I'd gone to church, but all of those things were things outside of me, that what I really wanted was for someone to force me to change my life, because I didn't have the courage at that time to really make the change for myself. And this particular incident I mean, unfortunately, I had a lot of incidents that involved law enforcement, but this one was a couple of months after the birth of my son. And, I thought him just being on the planet was going to change me because I thought I could change for him. And as I said, surely as a decent human being, I could remain abstinent for my son. And I just didn't understand you can't do something like that for someone else, but I didn't know that. So a couple of months after he was born, I was in Wichita, Kansas, and I was working, and my son and his mother actually came to visit. We had a beautiful 7-day visit where, we had love and just family, and it was such a beautiful time. I dropped them off at the airport. Nothing happened. I kissed them both goodbye, and I drove my car straight to the worst neighborhood in Wichita, where I spent the next 6 days drinking and smoking crack and just killing myself. And that 6-day binge ended with me handcuffed on the ground. The police are searching my car, and there's bullet holes in the side of my car. And I always remember this policeman digging through my car and finding cans and bottles and other stuff. And he finds this little glass pipe, a crack pipe that he pulls out. And I remember the shame that I felt as he's holding this thing and looking at me. But even more than that, what I remember is thinking to myself, so that's where that was. Because I had been looking for that. Like, and if he had handed it to me in that moment, I probably would have taken it from him and used it. Like I was sick. I was really my spirit was sick, my body was sick. And in that moment, I recognized something that changed my life. Even after 6 days of not sleeping, I had a thought out of the universe that just said to me, no one is coming to save you. Nobody can save you. Your son can't save you. Your wife, your boss, the church, AA, none of that can save you until you're willing to completely commit yourself to changing the way I was thinking and living. And I'm happy to say that on that day, I did make that commitment. And I went to a meeting that night. I ran the next day for a couple of miles. And I did those two things every single day for 3 straight years without missing a day. I went to a meeting and I ran. And I felt like my life depended on it because I think it did. And I slowly began to build a pretty amazing life for myself.
And that's now 30 years.
It is. Time does fly. I've gotten a lot slower. That's the only thing. You can see this is the T-shirt from the event coming up, and that's me running on the front. Like I'm like a penguin now with a headband and tennis shoes. It's not pretty to look at, but I can still keep moving.
You run almost every continent on the planet, right?
I have. Antarctica still escapes me at this point, but there are a couple of events on Antarctica that someday I'll get a chance to do one of those. But yes, and again, I think I'm up to nearly 50 countries at this point. And I usually don't go run a little ways. I usually run all the way across.
So now you have a big event coming up. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I celebrate in a way that's a little bit different than most people. So for me, every year on my sober anniversary, which is July 23rd, 1992 was the very first year. And every year I run for the same number of hours to equal the years that I've been sober. And so I started this around year number 15, because that's when it started to get pretty challenging then to run 15 hours, and then 16 and 17. And now with this year being 30, it seemed like an amazing time to celebrate. And I've partnered with Ashley Addiction Treatment Center, which you and I have talked about, and you've spoken with the folks at Ashley. And they're a nonprofit treatment center, one of the premier treatment centers in the country, up in Maryland on the Eastern Shore there on the Chesapeake Bay. And they've been around about 40 years. And I'm literally going to run on a 2.5-mile loop for 30 straight hours. And I won't be alone. I've got a lot of people coming to join me. And as I say, they can join for one loop, they can join for 10 hours, or come do the whole thing with me. But the reaction to it has just been overwhelming, quite frankly. It's been amazing to see the people that have chosen to jump into this and to make donations, but also donate their time. You can also do it virtually. So if someone can't make it, which of course most people can't, they can actually do something themselves wherever they live. And I wanted to ask you, you can see on here that this thing is called Movement for Recovery. And it occurred to me that, you and I have had many deep conversations about addiction and recovery. And you wrote a book in 2010 called Freedom from Addiction that I thought was brilliant. And it really looked at the problem of addiction in a really unique, sort of non-secular, without any dogma. It was a very straightforward look at addiction. But you and I have talked about the importance of actual physical movement to help you recover, really from anything, not just from addiction. But I don't know if you would be willing to say a few words about, your feelings about that.
Well, I've always felt that anything that happens in our mind affects our body and vice versa. So treating depression, addiction, which in my view is a search for, and I was saying journey from spirits to spirit, it wasn't facetious. Addiction is a search for the joy that comes from transcendence. So unfortunately, the drugs don't lead to transcendence, they lead to oblivion. So there's a difference between transcendence and oblivion. Oblivion is losing consciousness and decreasing awareness, whereas transcendence is unbounded consciousness and joy and ecstasy that is normally overshadowed by what we call the trials and tribulations of the conditioned mind. So our mind is conditioned by economics, by society, by culture, by social media, by history, by religion, by our parents, by our ancestors. It's too complex. But as individuals, you and I have what we call the divided mind. The divided mind is conflicted. If it's feeling sad, it looks for happiness. If it's feeling happiness, it's worried that it won't last. So the mind is never at peace. In fact, to say peace of mind is an oxymoron. The mind is conflicted, it's divided, it lives in fear, and all our problems are a result at some point, whether we remember it or not. All our problems go back to some kind of trauma, either physical trauma or psychological trauma, emotional trauma, verbal trauma, sexual trauma. Some of it we won't remember, some of it goes back to our time in the womb, and some of which is epigenetic, which means trauma recycles over generations. Now we call it intergenerational trauma. So while we can do everything to try and understand the source of this trauma, which is actually not difficult. What we call anger is the memory of trauma. Hostility is the desire to get even, or vengeance. We call it justice, but actually it's something altogether different. We want to prove, our ego wants to prove that I want to win. I want to get vengeance in the name of justice or whatever. So fear is the anticipation of trauma because you didn't know how to handle it in the past. And then if you blame yourself, as you did, you have guilt and shame and humiliation, and all of this leads to depression. And all of this is then connected with physical symptoms of whatever. Depression leads to inflammation, which leads to chronic disease, which leads to recycling of trauma, which leads to recycling of addictive behavior. So addiction has become, almost not, I should say, it's the number one disease of our civilization. It's an escape from reality. But the desire always, even of the addicted person, was joy, was ecstasy. And the first experiences of the addictive behavior actually brought intense pleasure. So now you're hooked to the memory of pleasure, even though it's not pleasure anymore, it's pain. But you can't get enough of what you don't want. You just can't get enough of what you don't want. So the solutions to things, problems created by the mind can never be the mind. You can't solve a problem at the level at which it was created. So the problem was always created by the mind. To find a solution by the mind is actually being deluded. You have to go beyond the mind. And that beyond the mind is what the addict was looking for in the first place: transcendence, joy, ecstasy. The word ecstasy means to step out of the realm of the divided mind into what we call the whole mind. And the word healing, the word whole, the word health, the word holy are the same. It's the integration of mind, body, emotions, and our relationships with each other and the world as a unified experience of self-regulation within the whole mind. And that whole mind is, of course, the spirit. So even though you thought you were your subconscious mind was searching for transcendence and joy, the behavior was leading to oblivion instead of transcendence. Oblivion is you lose awareness, and transcendence is you expand awareness to the point where it has no boundaries. Okay, so that's that. Therefore, running is one way actually to transcend. I'm sure you feel, we can give it all kinds of names. There's, you get an opiate high, your serotonin goes up, your dopamine goes up, you have secretion of anandamide, and the body feels an internal state of euphoria. But those are the biological markers, and euphoria is our fundamental state of unconditioned joy. Like, when you have the joy of an innocent child, that is unconditioned. And if we can get back to that joy, it's our source. And when you get back to your source, then you're holy, then you're healed, and you're whole. So you chose that spontaneously. And I'm sure you feel the ecstasy of that. There are other things, like I do practice meditation, self-awareness, contemplation, inquiry, vagal stimulation, breathing techniques, emotional resilience. But ultimately, the cure always is transcendence. That's the cure. Otherwise, it's what we call treatment. Doctors these days, they don't say I cure disease, or they say I treat, or even better, they say I practice. And they keep practicing and practicing and practicing, and nothing happens. So healing is not something that's taught to us in medical schools. I know that from my own experience. Healing, which is the return to wholeness, is transcendence to your spirit. But tell me now, this whole goal with this, you'd have this emblem, the penguin, and you explained it to me. But what's the goal of this next, what do you want the world to learn?
Yeah, well, I thank you so much. You just said like so much that that I'm not quite capable of expressing in such a beautiful way. And it takes me to this idea of joy that I've heard you talk about so many times. And I was trying to pay attention while my mind was also wandering as you were talking to joy, because I say it all the time to people that I will ask audiences, how many people, like there's 1,000 people, how many of you hate running? And 90% of the audience will raise their hand. And I, of course, make jokes and I say, you don't actually hate running. You hate like your middle school PE teacher who used running as a punishment for other things. And it set you on this course, because when you are capable of running as a human being, as a child at 3 or 4 or 5, you can't stop a child from running. He or she wants to run everywhere, and it's pure joy. And somehow life I don't know if it's life or parents or society. I don't know what it is. Maybe
All
you,
of the above.
all of the above, right? It like sucks the joy out of doing simple things like physical movement. And suddenly physical movement becomes a chore and a task. So you asked me what the purpose of this is. The real purpose is, in a way, is a destigmatizing, not just of addiction and recovery, but to remind people that if you go into a new activity, whether it's walking or running or yoga or meditation, actually, that's a good question for you. But if you go into a new activity with this thought all the time, I hate this. This is terrible. This sucks. How are you ever going to find joy in it? And so part of this is not to show how good a runner I am or whatever. And early on in my recovery, people actually said to me, it seems like you just switched addictions. And I found that to be an almost offensive comment, because I'm like, if you had seen me as a drug addict, you would not under any circumstance sort of criticize, what I'm doing now. I mean, I may do it obsessively, I may run obsessively, but I'm not like, I'm not selling my car or pawning my computer to enter a marathon. And I did all of those things in my previous life, to get drugs. And so I just even wonder from you, and you could take it in the form of meditation if you wanted this question, but like when someone is starting, and very often maybe they meditated just a little bit when they were younger and they didn't have a good experience, or they just didn't feel they were capable of doing it. How do you get someone to consider an activity that they're already predisposed to maybe not like? How do we get them to, if not like it, at least give it a chance? Because we know, whether it's running, walking, meditation, if they will try it for a couple of weeks and give it an honest try, they will benefit, and then they will want the results that they're getting.
Yeah, I think as in your case, suddenly the switch went on. And with most addicts, it's like that. A switch goes on. You can't convince another person. They have to have that shift in themselves. And what's the phrase? A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So you can't do that, but you can inspire them. And inspiration is a very interesting word. It's different from motivation. I don't like the word motivation, because motivation is of the mind, and the mind is conflicted, weak, always looking for something around the corner which will be better. Whereas inspiration, as the word means, is to be in spirit. Inspiration is right now. If you don't have it right now, you'll never have it. So it's being in the present moment. And that's what these activities do. The running, the walking, the yoga, the breathing, martial arts, mind-body coordination, vagal stimulation, they bring your awareness totally to the present. And I don't even use the present moment, because as soon as you say moment, you're in time. The present is not in time. It's timeless. It's never ending. And it's the spiritual background of all activity. And so when you are in that present, and I'm sure you've noticed that when you're running and you get into that feeling, that the exhilaration, at that moment, there is no time. At that moment, there is no anticipation. At that moment, there's no regret. At that moment, you're not thinking, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? You just, in fact, you disappear. All there is the running, and the running is happening through what used to be you. But that running is now the activity of your spirit, and it is exhilaration. See, mental motivation always comes to an end. People make New Year's resolutions every year. They join the gym. After 3 months, they're paying the fees, but they're not going anymore. And gyms know that. They make a lot of money. But when you have that switch, inspiration it's like a child that's born, can't return to the womb. There's no going back. And so, I would say that replace the word motivation with the word inspiration, to be in spirit. And to be in spirit is to be now, is to where past, present, future merge into the experience of what we call presence. Presence is spirit. So you found that on your own. Now you have this extraordinary following globally, and you're working with this extraordinary, wonderful institution. What do you want people to get from not only this conversation, but how do you want to empower people and inspire them by joining in some way or another what you're doing? And when is it coming up? Let's get all the details.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I think that I would be remiss not to mention the current state of things. And I think people understand in a general sense that, especially through these COVID years that we've all experienced together, there's a lot of talk about mental health and mental wellness and these kind of things. And as you know from our conversations, I try to stay away from disease pathology language and like there's something wrong with you that needs to be fixed. What I say all the time is there's something right with you that needs to be revealed. And you have to find that vehicle to reveal it and open yourself up to new activities, even things that you don't think you're good at, whether it's running or yoga or meditation or some other form of activity. I think we both agree that trauma therapy, all the things that you mentioned earlier, all the different types of trauma, it's important for most people to at some point address those traumas and try to find their way to it. I believe, and you can say if you feel differently, but I believe that too often in early recovery from something, people are searching for the deep answers from the beginning. And I think it's a process that if you can become more comfortable and familiar with your own skin and have forward-looking activities, you will eventually get an opportunity to look back at the things that may have caused you to reach those depths. I know that's the case for me. I tried too early to figure out what was wrong with me. Why did this happen to me? And I think that very idea scares a lot of people, and that fear prevents them from getting help. About 5 million people go into a treatment center in the United States every year. That sounds like a really big number, but that represents about 10% of the people that actually need help. So it's a very, very small number. So from a practical standpoint, the Penguin Run on July 23rd is about raising awareness and money for scholarships for people who can't afford to go into addiction treatment. So that's the practical part. But also just to remind people that, it's got to start somewhere. Like there has to be a movement in the movement. And you have a lifetime if you can stay sober, mostly abstinent or completely abstinent. Like I've also changed my view through the years. I used to think that like it was either all or nothing. It's not the way life works with anything, right? It's a progression. And sometimes we have setbacks and you try again. And hopefully each time you get a little bit farther up the mountain until maybe one day you don't have to go back down again. But it's this idea of just welcoming people into this concept that more is possible. Physical movement is one thing that you can really control. You can control your effort. I can make myself, I don't like to use the word necessarily suffering, but voluntary suffering. I believe that the more often I put myself in a position, just like is going to happen in July, I'm going to want to quit at some point during those 30 hours. It's inevitable. There's going to come a moment where I'm like going, why did I think this was a good idea? And that's the moment that I'm looking for. I want that moment because if I can get to that place and then find a way to move beyond it, something inspirational, that inspiration that lives inside me, move beyond it, that translates to the other parts of my life. So when I have a problem in my relationship, or I'm in danger of relapse in a bad moment, I've felt this feeling before, and I know that I can just move beyond it, and I don't have to make a bad decision in a particularly emotional moment. And I think that that's the concept of what I want people to understand. Physical movement is a controllable thing. You can quit anytime you want. You know, it's not one of the life or death things out there. You make yourself a bit uncomfortable so that you can find comfort when things are difficult in other parts of your life. And I don't find it, much more complicated than that. Do you think that people, trauma, at what point does someone need to deal with their trauma? Like, I mean, do they have to like try to go after it right away, or do you think it's more of a process?
I'm not a believer in solutions by the mind. So you don't even have to deal with it. You transcend it. You go beyond it. A lot of people, they keep going to psychoanalysis. Why did my mother not like me? And that 30 years have gone by, she's dead, and you're still, recycling that whole conversation, which is one perspective which couldn't even be true. So, I also ask people to practice a little reflection. Is it true? How do I know it's true? Is it one perspective? Are there other perspectives? How do I look at it from the other person's point of view? How do I look at it from a third party's point of view? How do I release this trauma? Let's be practical rather than just, get neurotic about finding out the cause. Even Freud said the discomfort we have, the inability to tolerate ambiguity, is a form of neurosis. Human beings are full of ambiguity, contradiction, paradox, and they think that there's something wrong with them, but there isn't. That's what it means to be human. So, there's nothing wrong with the mind. It's nothing wrong with the body. It's nothing wrong with the world. It's just the way you're interpreting what is a joyful experience. And, you've mistaken temporary pleasure for fulfillment. And that's what happens. And, ultimately, as I said, the pleasure is not even pleasure, it's pain, but you're addicted to the memory of pleasure. Now, tell me one more thing, and then, we should let the audience know how they can get involved. When is the event? What is going to happen? How can people find out more about it? And how can they join this amazing, extraordinary movement to expand awareness, but also find solutions to addictive behavior, the number one disease of our civilization?
Yeah, it is. It is. We lost, 108,000 people died just of overdose, and that doesn't even count. That was last year, and that doesn't even count alcohol, which is another 700,000 or more. And it is the number one thing. And COVID has made it harder because people are spending a lot of time alone. And I think community, we would agree. I know we always agree on this: fellowship and community, whatever your community. Mine is running, recovery, vegan, like all of these things are they're different communities. And that's the way that I've managed to, I think, accumulate 30 years clean and sober. And my very first sponsor years ago used to say, to keep it, you have to give it away. And I've always loved this saying because it's that desire and ability to give, which you do all the time. You give of yourself, your knowledge, your passion, your wisdom, without any expectation of return. Like the return is inherent in the process. And I think
It's called generosity of spirit. The spirit is infinitely generous.
it is. And so are you. So the event is July 23 and 24. It's at Ashley Addiction Treatment Center, which is in Havre de Grace, Maryland. And you'll see it in the show notes here, I'm sure. And anyone can follow me on social media, Instagram, and the link is there in my bio. And I just tell people that get involved. For like $20, you can register virtually, and sometime during that weekend, you can walk for an hour in honor of, maybe it's not you, maybe it's a loved one who struggles with addiction. Maybe we almost all know someone who did not survive their battle with addiction. We all know people who died from alcoholism, drug addiction, a lot of these issues. And so you can move your body in honor of those people. You can also just hit the donate button, and you're welcome to just, throw a little cash our way, which it all goes towards research, which sir, that I am very much, I'm a Whoop guy these days, and we're using wearable devices to really change the way the interaction goes, especially when someone is no longer in rehab, when they leave rehab. And Ashley is one of these places that's doing cutting edge research with Johns Hopkins specifically, and they have for many years now. Because as you know, as a doctor, you need data, and sometimes people want to see proof before they're willing to try something. And so this run, July 23rd at Ashley, is all about just bringing people to this idea that we need fellowship and community, and if we take action and move our bodies together, we can help a lot of people change the course of their lives.
So Charlie said we need data, and Charlie himself is a data point. You are now what, 60? Have you achieved 60 years of age?
I'll be 60 in September, God willing. So thank you very much for that.
You'll be 60 in September, and you're the embodiment of a joyful, energetic body, loving heart, clear mind, and lightness of being, and generosity of spirit. So what more can we ask? Congratulations, Charlie.
Thank you, my friend.
Dear friends, check out all the links here. Join the movement and help create a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. And you can start right now by joining Charlie's campaign and helping us all become not only sober, but creative and joyful and loving and compassionate, and having that inner peace that comes from going beyond our habitual certainties and our tendencies that are so self-destructive. Charlie, thank you very much for having this conversation. Good luck to you. And let's get as many people enrolled as possible in this wonderful effort of yours to help people alleviate their suffering.
Thank you, sir.